Alright, this is IMAX Nation 1980 here. I'm going to show you my record collection, beginning with the Beatles. This is with the Beatles. It's an original British album. It's in stereo. This is a later pressing from 1973. It was originally released November 22nd, 1963. Here's the back of it. Take the jacket off for a second. Get the record out nicely here. Here's the label. Yeah, it's a 1973 pressing right there. The first Beatles British album is Please Please Me, which I don't have. I mostly have American Beatles albums. So that was with the Beatles. Next up is the Beatles' first American album. This is Introducing the Beatles, and it's on VJ Records. And it was originally released January 10th, 1964, with a revised version, which I'm holding right here. February 10th, about a month later. It replaces the songs Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You with Ask Me Why and Please Please Me. And this isn't in great condition, as you can see here, but here's the label. Next up, here's Meet the Beatles, which is the first Beatles American album on Capitol Records, even though the cover just says the first album by England's phenomenal pop combo. It uses the cover from With the Beatles. And this is when the Beatles were starting to become famous in the United States, when songs like I Want to Hold Your Hand were doing really good. And it's the opening track on this album, and it's also in mono. Let me show you the record itself. Take out the protective sleeve here. By the edges there. Yep, this is in mono. Mono versions of Beatles albums are often sought after by collectors, especially Sgt. Pepper. And here I have another copy of it, but it's in worse condition. It's the same exact pressing. It's an original pressing, and it's also in mono. There's some writing on the back, though, and it's kind of dirty. But it's the same pressing. Something new. Now, this is a American Beatles album. Oh, by the way, the release date for Meet the Beatles was January 20th, 1964, a mere 10 days after introducing the Beatles. This was released July 20th, 1964, and it features tracks from A Hard Day's Night, along with some singles and tracks from the Long Tall Sally extended play, which was released in Britain. Like Matchbox is on here, and also the German version of I Want to Hold Your Hand. And this is in stereo. This is also a later pressing. It's from either the late 60s or really early 70s. Here's the back of it. And there's the promos for other Beatles albums on the back. Show you the label. Yeah, it's a later pressing. It's on Apple. Okay, next up, I don't have the cover for this album, but it's the way it came. Hold it by the edges there. Beatles 65, which is another American Beatles album. This was released December 15th, 1964, and it uses tracks from Beatles for Sale, A Hard Day's Night, and some singles at the time. This is also in mono format, by the way. Next up, we got the early Beatles. My dad gave this to me. This was released March 22nd, 1965, and it has tracks on it that were never before released on Capitol Records, which appeared on Introducing the Beatles. So the album is appropriately called The Early Beatles. However, this is a much later pressing from around 1969, maybe 1970. I have to find that out. But it's still in nice condition. Here we got Help. This is the American version of the album. This was released August 13th, 1965, a couple of days after the original British release, and it's in fine condition, but again, this is also a later pressing. This pressing is actually from 1978. Let me show you the gatefold really quickly. It's stills from the movie Help. Just like Hard Day's Night, Help was a film. And here's the label. Yep, it's a 1978 pressing with the maroonish label. And also, the difference between the US and the UK version is that side 2 and side 1, they both use pieces of the film's soundtrack along with the songs in the film. The UK version has songs on the other side of the album that are not in the movie. And here's the British version of Rubber Soul. Now, this is a phenomenal Beatles album. This was released December 3rd, 1965, and shrink wrap is on it and everything. It's one of my favorite Beatles albums, that's for sure. Let me show you the album here. It's a 1973 pressing, but it's in fine condition. And also, got the American version of the album, which was released 3 days after the British album. This is the one that inspired Brian Wilson to do the album Pet Sounds with the Beach Boys. It's not in very good condition, this album, but it's in mono, which is pretty cool. Let me show you the record very quickly. There's some skips on the album. I played it, so it's not in great condition, but that's the way it came. The US version is different from the UK version, as it tries to have a more folksy kind of sound. Because, you know, folk was starting to make its rounds at the time with Bob Dylan and all that. Here we got Beatles, Yesterday and Today. Now, this is a controversial album because when this album first came out, it had a cover, the Butcher cover. And some copies of it have the new cover, but you can steam it off to get the Butcher copy. I highly doubt it's under here because this is a much later pressing from like the mid-70s. And this has tracks from that were left off Rubber Soul. And it was also released. It was released June 20th, 1966, and it also has tracks that would appear on the British Revolver album because a few songs were cut from the American version. Yeah, see, it's a much later pressing. It has the red label. Reddish orange label. The Capitol label at the time. Got a couple of more Beatle albums with that on there. Here's the American Revolver. This was released a few days after the British Revolver. The British Revolver came out August 5th, 1966, and it's in stereo. And the difference you could see, it's Capitol instead of the Parlophone logo. And a few tracks are removed because they had already appeared on the US album Yesterday and Today. Here's the label. This is an earlier pressing. I think it's one of the first, actually. I also have a later pressing here on Apple, which I'll show you. And then we'll have to end the video. Actually, we're running out of time, so I'll show it in the next video. Stick around.